I'm going to tell you something that took me 35 years and over 2,000 clients to fully understand. Most people get poorer after they retire. Not immediately, not dramatically, quietly, month by month, year by year. The gap between what they have and what they need grows, until one day they realize there is no closing it. I've watched this happen to brilliant, careful, hard-working people. People who saved. People who believed they had done enough. And the truth I'm about to share is not pleasant. But I've spent too many years watching people hear the comfortable version and walk into disaster. You deserve the version I wished my failed clients had listened to. I am Dr. Richard Ashford. I spent 35 years as a retirement planning economist. I hold graduate degrees from institutions that open doors. I publish papers on pension sustainability that colleagues cited in academic journals. I gave lectures to auditoriums full of financial professionals, and over the course of my career, I personally advised over 2,000 individuals on how to build, protect, and sustain their wealth through retirement. I was called the retirement architect by people in my field. I built my own retirement exactly the way I told every client to build theirs. I followed my own rules. I am 70 years old. My retirement is secure. My money is structured. My health is managed. I sleep well. But here is what keeps me from fully resting. Of the 2,000 people I worked with, only 3% actually grew their wealth after 65. The other 97% either held on for a few years before the slow decline began, or they lost ground almost immediately. Some lost everything. And the majority of those who failed were not reckless. They were engineers, teachers, dentists, small business owners. They had 401ks, they had IRAs, they had done what they were told. And it still wasn't enough, because having money going into retirement and knowing how to manage money in retirement are two completely different things. Almost nobody tells you that. And that silence has cost the people I cared about everything. Stay with me. What I'm about to share is the exact conversation I wish I had forced every one of them to sit through before it was too late. Here is the thing about patterns. You don't see them the first time, or the 10th. You start to see them around the 100th client. And by the 2000th, you can predict it before the person in front of you finishes their first sentence. For 35 years, I watched the same story repeat with almost mechanical precision. The names changed, the account balances changed, but the underlying sequence, the exact chain of choices that led from, "I think I'm ready to retire," to, "I don't understand how this happened to me," barely changed at all. And it almost always started the same way, with confidence, not arrogance, confidence. These were careful, intelligent, hard-working people. They had built something real. They had a number in their head, a target balance, a retirement date circled on a calendar, and they had hit it, or come close enough. And so they felt reasonably that they had arrived, that the hard part was behind them. What they didn't understand, what almost nobody tells you, and what I will tell you right now, is that reaching retirement age with money is not the same as knowing how to manage money in retirement. Accumulation and distribution are not the same game. You spend 40 years learning how to put money in. The moment you shift to taking money out, you are playing a game with completely different rules that most people have never practiced even once. I've seen it so many times I could set my watch by it. I had a client, I'll call him Robert, 64 years old, a senior engineer from outside Dallas. Robert had done genuinely impressive things. He had maxed out his 401k contributions for 22 consecutive years. He had a Roth IRA. He had a small pension from a previous employer. He had a taxable brokerage account. On paper, Robert was the picture of a disciplined retirement saver. He walked into my office in 2017 with the calm, measured confidence of a man who believed the work was finished. He had $1.4 million across his accounts. His mortgage was paid off. His children were through college. He was 64, and he was ready. And I looked at his numbers, and I looked at him, and I felt the beginning of that familiar unease, the one I've felt 100 times before, because I could already see what Robert could not. He had no distribution strategy. He had never thought about sequence of returns risk. He had no Roth conversion plan. He was planning to draw from his largest, most tax-heavy account first. He had never once seriously modeled the full cost of health care before Medicare eligibility at 65, nor what his required minimum distributions at 73 would do to his tax bracket. Robert thought the game was over. The game had barely started, and I'm going to tell you his full story, because Robert is not one man. Robert is the pattern. Robert is the exact mistake I watched destroy the retirements of people I respected and cared about. Robert came to me with a plan. Retire at 65, pull from his 401k as needed, let the market grow the rest, collect Social Security at 66, and live on the combination. A reasonable plan for someone who had never studied retirement income mechanics. That's the tragedy. Robert had spent decades mastering structural engineering. He understood load tolerances and material fatigue with precision. But nobody had ever explained how money actually behaves the moment you start pulling it out. The first thing I told him, Robert, your money is not the problem. Your assumptions are. And the most dangerous assumption you have, the one that will cost you the most, is your assumption about how long you're going to live. He smiled. He said what most people in his position say. I'll probably make it to 80, maybe 85. My parents both had long lives. I opened my laptop. I showed him actuarial tables most people never see. A 65-year-old American male in average health has a better than 40% chance of living to 90. A 65-year-old couple has a greater than 50% chance that at least one of them will live past 92. Robert's $1.4 million, drawn down at his projected rate, would be substantially depleted by the time he was 83, and that was before accounting for health care costs, which, for a retired American couple, now average over $315,000 out of pocket over the full course of retirement, according to the most recent Fidelity retiree health care cost estimate. That was before factoring in the inflation that steadily erodes purchasing power. And that was before a single meaningful market downturn in the early years of his retirement, which, statistically, he faced roughly a 1 in 3 probability of experiencing. Robert's confidence began to shift. I saw it happen across his face in real time. The jaw tightened. The eyes dropped to the table. I've seen that exact look hundreds of times across 35 years. It never gets easier to watch. But here is where Robert's story takes the turn that matters. Robert had a brother, Gary, who came to me 2 years earlier, at 62, with $890,000. Less than Robert on paper. But Gary had done one thing Robert had not. He sat across from me and let me walk him through a distribution strategy. He started Roth conversions early, locking in lower tax rates. He delayed Social Security to 68, collecting a benefit 32% higher than he'd have received at 62. He built a retirement income floor, guaranteed sources covering core expenses no matter what the market did. And he sequenced withdrawals to minimize taxes every year. Gary, with $890,000 at 62, was on track to have more spendable income at 80 than Robert with $1.4 million using his original plan. The difference was not the amount. The difference was the strategy. That is the lesson 2,000 clients taught me. Let me tell you what happened to Robert after that first meeting. He came back 3 weeks later, slightly more defensive than when he had left. He had done what frightened people do. He looked for a second opinion that would tell him what he wanted to hear. He called a friend who had retired and seemed fine. He read things online. And he came back and said, "Richard, I think you're being too conservative." I've heard those words more times than I can count. From people who found middle ground and ended up okay. And from people who walked out, ignored the advice, and spent the next decade watching the slow, quiet erosion of everything they had built. Robert did make some changes. He delayed Social Security by 2 years. Not the full 3 I recommended, but 2. He started some Roth conversions, though not at the pace that would have given him maximum benefit. What he would not do was restructure his withdrawal sequence. He was emotionally attached to the idea of preserving his Roth account as a legacy for his children. I understood the impulse completely. It is a deeply human one, but mathematics does not negotiate with human impulses. Then 2022 arrived. The market dropped roughly 20% over the course of that year. For someone still accumulating, still adding money to a portfolio, a 20% correction is painful, but mathematically recoverable. For someone actively withdrawing from their portfolio during a 20% decline, the math changes in ways that are permanent. This is sequence of returns risk in its real destructive form. When you sell shares to fund your living expenses during a market downturn, you are locking in losses. You are selling at the bottom. And you are permanently reducing the number of shares left to recover when the market eventually rises. The damage is not temporary. It is compounded in reverse. Robert called me in the spring of 2023. His voice was different. The quiet confidence was gone. His $1.4 million had become just over $900,000 in 18 months. He was 69, and for the first time, the arithmetic was delivering a conclusion he had not wanted to believe was possible. He said, "Richard, I think I need to go back to work." Those are among the hardest words I have ever heard a client say. At 69, going back is not a clean solution. The roles are different. The energy is different. The emotional cost is real. I did everything I could. We rebuilt what we could. I got him to a more stable place. But the cost, in dollars, in stress, in the shape of what his retirement became, did not have to be that way. That's the part I still carry. Now let me tell you what you need to do, not what you should think about, not what you might want to consider at some point. What you need to do, because I have watched enough thoughtful, intelligent people think and delay and end up like Robert, that I am done softening this message. First, if you are between 55 and 70, the single most valuable action you can take right now is to run your numbers through a retirement income simulation. Not a savings calculator, but an income simulation. One that factors in your specific withdrawal sequence, your tax exposure, your Social Security timing strategy, and your projected healthcare costs. Most people have never done this. Most people are working from a feeling and a round number and a hope. That is not a plan. That is a wish that wears the costume of a plan. Second, understand sequence of returns risk as though your retirement depends on it, because it does. If you retire into a declining market and you are drawing money from your portfolio, the mathematical damage is categorically different from experiencing the same downturn while still accumulating. You need a buffer, cash reserves, short-term bonds, guaranteed income sources, so that you are never forced to sell equity at a loss simply to cover your monthly living expenses. This buffer is not a luxury. It is the load-bearing wall of a distribution strategy. Third, know your Roth conversion window and use it. Between 62 and 73, before required minimum distributions force taxable income you can't control, you have a window to convert traditional IRA or 401k money to Roth at a lower effective rate. For many clients, a disciplined Roth conversion strategy during that window saved between $40,000 and $120,000 in lifetime taxes. Every year you ignore that window, you are likely paying more than necessary. Fourth, Social Security timing is a strategy decision, not an impatience decision. Every year you delay past 62 adds roughly 8% to your annual benefit. Delaying from 62 to 70 grows your benefit by approximately 76%. For someone who lives to 85, and actuarially there is a real chance you will, the lifetime value of that decision changes the entire character of your retirement. Run the numbers, then decide. Fifth, healthcare is not a detail you handle when you get there. For Americans retiring before 65, the gap between leaving employer coverage and reaching Medicare is one of the most financially dangerous periods in a retirement life. COBRA is expensive. ACA plans require planning. Not having a healthcare bridge strategy is not a minor oversight. It is a potential catastrophe that I have watched happen to people who believed they were prepared. I'm still sitting here at 70 because of Robert, because of the dozens of clients whose faces I can still see. Brilliant, hard-working, responsible people who arrived at the most important financial transition of their lives without the knowledge they needed. Every week I speak with someone who is 63 or 68 or 71, and they are in the middle of a situation that was preventable. Every one of those conversations is one more chance to do what I wished I had done better for Robert. Sit down, look them in the eye, and tell them the truth before it's too late. The 3% who grew richer after 65 did not get lucky. They understood the distribution game. They made specific, deliberate decisions at specific moments about withdrawal sequence, tax strategy, Social Security timing, healthcare structure. That is not magic. That is knowledge applied at the right time. You still have time. The only question that matters right now is whether you are going to use it.